Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm David Willms, Associate Vice President for Public Lands at the National Wildlife Federation, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists first and everybody that's joined this call for joining us today for this conversation. Before we begin, I'd also like to extend a special thank you to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for their generous support, without which neither the report we're discussing today or this webinar would be possible. Recently, the University of Wyoming's Ruckelshaus Institute released a report analyzing the challenges, implementation, and durability of 37 state and 10 local policies designed to conserve wildlife corridors and enhance habitat connectivity. You can find a copy of that report, if you haven't seen it yet, in the chat. Today, we have two of the report's authors and a state wildlife agency official here to discuss the findings of this report and answer any questions about the challenges and opportunities in implementing policies to conserve wildlife migration corridors. Our first panelist is Temple Stoellinger. Temple is Associate Dean of the University of Wyoming's Hobbs School of Environment and Natural Resources. She teaches wildlife law, environment and natural resources law and policy, public land law, and a course on the National Environmental Policy Act. Her scholarship integrates thinking from the fields of law, economics, policy, and more to explore relevant and timely approaches for decision-making around wildlife, land, energy, and other valued natural resources. She co-authored the report we are discussing today, and in her remarks, Temple will provide a high-level summary of the report and provide important takeaways. She will then offer some reactions and insights on the report's contents from a legal perspective. Our second panelist is Travis Brammer. Travis is the first ever Director of Conservation for the Bozeman, Montana-based Property and Environment Research Center, where he oversees the organization's Conservation Innovation Lab and all of its field projects. Prior to that, he served as a conservation fellow at the University of Wyoming's Ruckelshaus Institute and Macmillan Private Land Stewardship Program, where, among other things, he co-authored the report we are discussing today. Travis will be focusing his remarks on the variety of county and municipal policies that are in place to facilitate wildlife connectivity and movement. Our final panelist is Michelle Cowardin. Michelle is a wildlife biologist that has worked for Colorado Parks and Wildlife since 2002. She currently serves as the agency's wildlife movement coordinator and is co-chair of the Colorado Wildlife and Transportation Alliance. Michelle has been a leader in Colorado in building successful local, state, and federal partnerships to help reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and facilitate wildlife movement, and has been integral in securing funding for some of the most ambitious wildlife crossing projects in Colorado. She has also worked extensively on the design, construction, and monitoring phases of many of these projects. Michelle will share her perspectives and reflections on implementation of state, county, and municipal policies to facilitate wildlife movement in Colorado. Also joining is Drew Bennett of the University of Wyoming, who is not a panelist, but he was a co-author of this report, and he will be available during our question and answer portion to answer questions. Once each of the panelists have completed their remarks, I will invite all of them back to engage in a facilitated discussion in response to the questions of you that are listening. So if you do have any questions that you'd like the panelists to answer, please put them in the Q&A at any time, and we'll do our best to get to them during the discussion that follows their remarks. So at this point, I will turn it over to Temple. Thanks, Temple.
Great. Thank you, David. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint here real quick. Okay. I assume that's working unless somebody tells me otherwise. But thank you for that warm introduction, David. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for tuning in over your lunch hour to this webinar. I wanted to just start with providing a little bit of motivation as to why we decided to embark on developing this report. We were seeing a lot of focus on landscape connectivity, which we all know is critical for maintaining wildlife movements. We were seeing it gained national attention in the form of this slide depicts some of the major federal acts in recent years that have addressed wildlife connectivity. And we were also seeing an increase in state, local, and municipal action around connectivity. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity to sort of dig into what those emerging policies were looking like. And as we sort of searched the academic literature, found that sort of little analysis had been done, analyzing and understanding these different approaches that were emerging. And so we wanted to fill that gap by analyzing the approaches policies were taking, the sectors they were targeting, and the perceptions about their success and challenges and implementation, as well as their perceived impact and durability. So to embark on this work, we partnered with the Center for Large Landscape and Conservation, specifically our co-author, Zach Wurtzenbach. And we built off of their 2021 Ecology Connectivity Policy Compendium, which you see on the screen here. And if you haven't had a chance to dig into that document, I would certainly recommend it as well. So we built off this work, but then we analyzed an additional 47 policies, 37 at the state level, covering 13 different states, and then 10 policies at the local government, county or municipal level. And when I say we, I want to make sure and thank the team of University of Wyoming law students that helped us do this work, including Heather Bradford, Joe Budd, Colton Edwards, and Jacob Stewart. So without their actual work to dig into these policies, this report wouldn't have been possible, and we're really thankful for their help. As we were looking at these policies, as I mentioned, and I have slides following to talk about this in more detail, we focused on the structure of the policies, the implementation of the policies, and also looking at the type of policies, made some suggestions or some thinking about their durability. And to help us answer some of these questions, we also conducted 20 expert interviews as well. And so that's kind of the approach we took to completing this report. So now moving on to what did we find through this analysis? Well, as I mentioned, the first thing that we did is we broke these policies down into the different sectors that they were primarily targeting. And our analysis showed that the two largest sectors included both the natural resources sector, which we encompassed to include wildlife management as well as forestry, and then also the transportation sector. And this is probably not surprising news to many of you on the call, but what we found is there was actually a lot of interaction between these two different sectors. There were specific direction in a lot of the policies that we analyzed that natural resource agencies work directly or collaboratively with transportation agencies. And that could include identifying hotspots and then coordinating siting of wildlife crossing structures over major transportation routes, for example. In addition, when we were thinking about structure and through our interviews, what we maybe assumed going into the work is that maybe these policies appear to be kind of standing alone in isolation. But what we found as we dug into these policies is that there's actually a lot of interconnection. Some examples of that include policies that were specifically referencing federal policies and federal funding opportunities. We also found that many of these policies were interconnected with existing state programs, and so they were built into the structure that already exists. And then we also found that there was often a history of policy evolution over time. So we saw, perhaps a state starting with an interagency MOU to address connectivity, and then over time, we're able to move that MOU into a more robust form of state legislation. So more interconnection than we initially anticipated when we started this project. The next thing that we dug into was the implementation aspect of these different policies. Specifically, what are the means for achieving on-the-ground impact that were intended in these particular policies we analyzed. And so of the policies we analyzed, we found that 26 of those policies required state or local agencies to create a plan to conserve connectivity. And while plans themselves may not achieve on-the-ground impact, they're often the logical first place to start. They help you gain additional access to funding, which can then lead to later on-the-ground impact. So really, through our interviews too, it appeared that starting with a plan is the most logical place to start with regards to connectivity. We were also able to document how some states with more advanced connect policies had built upon their initial planning framework to begin with. I would say maybe with regards to implementation overall, we identified 10 different forms of implementation mechanisms. We're only depicting the top 5 here on this particular screen, but wanted to share with you that we were surprised by the variety of different strategies that are out there with regards to implementation strategies. And in our opinion, we kind of focused in on California as perhaps offering the most innovative or distinct implementation strategies, specifically including they have a really robust strategy around compensatory mitigation for connectivity, which includes if you are developing in a key area for connectivity, you have to offset or provide compensatory mitigation for the impact to that key connectivity area. We also, looked at the origin and then made assumptions about durability based upon origin through our analysis. So we considered durability by analyzing the mechanisms or means by which the policies were established. In general, we found that policies that are created by legislation, by state legislation is where we were specifically focusing our analysis, that those policies tend to be more durable and they last through changes of executive administrations because they're harder to change or to reverse. And then conversely, state policies or local government policies that were executed through executive orders or through MOUs, we consider to be less durable because they can be more easily amended or repealed following an administrative change. But surprisingly, what our interviews revealed actually is that even less durable policies like an executive order or an MOU showed surprising longevity in this connectivity conservation space. In fact, many of these efforts have garnered broad bipartisan support and contrary to expectations, have rarely been overturned. In fact, new administrations have often maintained and expanded these different initiatives. What we also heard during our interviews was that it is really critical to think about building broad grassroots support as a key to policy's ultimate success and durability. And what do we mean by broad grassroots support? We mean support from hunters, landowners, NGOs, the energy sector, the transportation sector, and the public in general. So our interviews revealed that connectivity policies in general appear to have pretty broad bipartisan support, and that's largely due to their general popularity with the general public. And one of the reasons for overall public support is because many of these policies address human health and safety, specifically with regards to transportation. So you can imagine overpasses and underpasses for wildlife ultimately help reduce vehicle collisions, which ultimately help address human health and safety. And so therefore a lot of general support for connectivity policies. Another reason that connectivity policies are likely so publicly popular is they're often targeting iconic species that a lot of people care about. So for example, in Florida, perhaps it's the panther, and here in the American West, maybe it's ungulates like elk and mule deer. So that's the conclusion of the meat of our report. And I wanted to spend the last couple of slides that I have here to just talk about a couple of specific examples of policies that we dug into to give you a sense of kind of the range of policies across the United States that we considered. So the first one comes from Wyoming, and it's the Wyoming USDA Big Game Partnership that was established in 2022. It was established via an MOU between the state of Wyoming and the USDA. And it's a policy that's specifically built off the state of Wyoming's Migration Corridor Protection Plan. So again, it's that scaffolding of policies that I was speaking about earlier. And what this program is intended to do is it's intended to leverage federal funding to help support previously identified state priority areas for connectivity, including 3 designation migration corridors across different regions of the state of Wyoming. And while this partnership began with an initial $15 million commitment from the USDA via Farm Bill funding, it's continued with additional funding commitments from the USDA annually as well. Through this partnership, the USDA works in close collaboration with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and local NGO partners to deliver projects on the ground. So to us, this policy demonstrates state integration with federal policies and federal funding, bringing federal funding dollars to on-the-ground projects. It also demonstrates a great deal of broad grassroots public support And that has actually been documented by some of our research colleagues here at the University of Wyoming, who've shown that these policies have been highly supported by the public, particularly sportsmen's groups throughout Wyoming. The next example that I want to highlight is the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act that was signed by Governor DeSantis in 2021. This act again builds on state policies dating back to 2013 in the state of Florida that focused on mitigating wildlife impacts in transportation planning and in development of land in Florida. So again, another example of a scaffolding approach. This policy focuses on connecting core areas within designated conservation priority zones. And to achieve this, this legislation allocates $40 million for strategic land acquisition. So this funding targets the expansion of state parks and state forests, as well as the establishment of private land conservation easements. Similar to the Wyoming project, what we found from analyzing this policy is that it has also garnered broad bipartisan public support from a diverse coalition of stakeholders. And there's a large coalition of NGOs and other interest groups who have been heavily involved in this effort and its implementation. So I wanted to end here with a couple of key takeaways from the report. And again, thank you for linking the report in the chat. So if you'd like to dig into the report, you can definitely do that. We would encourage that. So a couple of concluding remarks here from our work. The first is that I think our research reveals that there's multiple different effective approaches to implementing wildlife corridor policies. There's not just a one-way route, so it can be tailored to the specific needs of each individual state. Some of those examples include internal agency regulations, interagency memorandums of understanding, state legislative actions, governor's executive orders. So there's lots of different strategies and angles, and you don't have to start with big statewide legislation. In fact, you can use that scaffolding approach and build big policies over a number of years. And as I mentioned before, in fact, we found that even what would appear to be a less durable policy like an MOU or or executive order, as long as they have broad bipartisan and broad public support, can grow over time and can lead to high profile pieces of state legislation, or can be added upon by future administrations as well. Again, just to reiterate the second point here, which is that building that broad public support is critical, as both the Wyoming and the Florida examples demonstrate. And I'm sure that Michelle is going to share with us that that's been true in Colorado as well during her remarks. And I just wanted to leave you with maybe our thoughts about this report and what we hope you take away from it. We hope that our work underscores that there's a vast potential for knowledge sharing and collaboration across all levels of government. There's outstanding work on connectivity being conducted throughout the country in many different states. Many of you who are here with us today on this webinar are likely involved in a lot of that work. We also hope that this report can serve as a valuable resource for policymakers and conservationists looking to develop or improve their own state's connectivity initiatives by seeing what's been done in other jurisdictions as well. So I just want to end by saying thank you. I again want to just echo David's thanks to the Hewlett Foundation for their funding that made this effort possible. I'd also like to thank our partner, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and Zach Wurzenbach especially. And I'd also like to thank the National Wildlife Federation for your help in organizing this webinar and helping us to share out the report. And then finally, I think thanks to my co-authors, Drew Bennett, Zach Wurzenbach, Travis Brammer, Sharon Bacino, and to the law students who we all know really did the hard work, Heather Bradford, Joe Budd, Colton Edwards, and Jacob Stewart. So I've highlighted mostly state policies, and I'm going to turn it over to Travis, who's going to share some more information with us about local government policies that we also analyzed in this report.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Temple, so much. That was great to hear. And yeah, instead of running through my whole list of thank yous, I guess I'll just echo a lot of the folks that Temple thanked, Hewlett Foundation, National Wildlife Federation for hosting and facilitating today. Thanks, David, for all your work on this. And thanks to Drew for getting this project to where it is today. So like David mentioned earlier, I'm the Director of Conservation at PERC. I started this project when I was a conservation fellow at the University of Wyoming's Ruckelshaus Institute. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our findings from the report as it relates to state or county and local government policies and their efforts to protect connectivity. So if I could just leave everybody with one takeaway, and I apologize I don't have slides today, but if I could leave everybody with one takeaway, and my kind of major point that I want to hammer home here is that county and local governments have a lot more to offer when it comes to conservation of connectivity than they're often given credit for. County and local governments can regulate land use and land development, and they do that in the form of land use planning and zoning. And when we're talking about landscape connectivity, the ability to regulate land use and dictate where things can and cannot happen and on what pieces of land certain development can take place, that's incredibly important for maintaining connected and open landscapes. The other thing that county and local governments can regulate is transportation. Now, some of this ability to regulate transportation might come from their land use authority, but it's something that's often overlooked at the county and local level and can be really important and something the county and local governments should try and leverage if they're interested in protecting connectivity. The other thing that county and local governments can offer is a bottom-up or on-the-ground kind of perspective to federal and state agencies. And that kind of goes to something Temple talked about, which is that idea of scaffolding and building upon policies at lower levels of government. And counties are in the weeds. Their constituents are the ones who deal with connectivity on a day-to-day basis, both in a negative context as well as a positive context. Negatively, counties are the ones who bear the costs when landscapes are fragmented, and there's a high number of wildlife vehicle collisions, and that's just one example of the consequences of a fragmented landscape. But when there's that high number of wildlife vehicle collisions, it's county and local constituents that are bearing those costs, and county and local governments that receive the complaints about those. On the positive side, though, county and local governments benefit by having connected landscapes because it increases the opportunities for wildlife viewing, for hunting, for recreation, for a lot of that economic activity. But it also creates a lot of social and cultural value because having those connected landscapes and the robust populations of wildlife and plants that rely on connected landscapes creates that social and cultural connection to the land that county and local constituents can benefit from. So in my next couple minutes here, I want to highlight some examples to show the spectrum of what counties are doing and kind of highlight and really hammer home again that county and local governments have a lot more to offer than they're given credit for. So I'm going to focus on some counties that are have implemented some interesting policies in the transportation and land use regulation space. And then I'm going to highlight a couple of counties in New Mexico that have taken a really interesting approach in sharing their bottom-up perspective with higher levels of government. So in the transportation sector, some counties that have done interesting policies are Teton County, Wyoming, and Summit County, Colorado. In Teton County, what they've done is they've created a master plan related to land use, but specifically tied to transportation and connectivity. And they relied really heavily on local feedback to identify hotspots, prioritize projects, and figure out kind of what projects make sense in certain areas. So it's that really ground up kind of information. Teton County uniquely and kind of specific to that county created a dedicated funding source to pay for these projects. Summit County, Colorado, on the other hand, created a really similar plan at that county level related to transportation, relied on local feedback to identify and prioritize hotspots. But they did not create a standalone funding source, but what they did is created a coalition of the county government, some local NGOs, and state and federal agencies. And that coalition can bring different resources to bear to help them get those connectivity policies to where they need to be. So both Teton and Summit County, related to transportation at the county level, demonstrate that counties really do hold a lot of power when it comes to transportation regulation. They relied heavily on local involvement. And like Temple mentioned, they really leaned into that safety aspect because their constituents faced such a high number of wildlife vehicle collisions. They really wanted to access that as a means of justifying creating these connectivity policies. Now I want to talk about some counties doing some interesting land use policies, and I want to start with Hennepin County, Minnesota, and then I'll quickly highlight Ventura County, California. So in Hennepin County, Minnesota, they've created a high-level, big picture land use plan for the whole county trying to identify and prioritize connected habitats and proposing some different tools that might be able to help them maintain or enhance those connected habitats. But this is a really high level plan. It doesn't necessarily have any regulatory enforcement. It doesn't have any teeth, so to say. But then if we look at Ventura County, California, they rely on zoning regulations and specifically zoning overlays. So the county is already zoned, but in those areas of high connectivity value, there's an additional level of protection and scrutiny for those land uses that goes down very specifically to individual parcels and regulates things like fencing and outdoor lighting and gets really, really into the weeds. And that just kind of shows the spectrum that counties have access to when it comes to conserving connectivity. The Hennepin County really high level plan creates a lot of value, and it just gives the county something to think about every time they take an action on those lands that are identified as high priority. Whereas Ventura County is much more in the weeds. It has a lot more regulatory teeth down to the specific parcel level and what kinds of fences can be used. And that's either both of them work and both of them have shown early signs of success, but it just kind of shows that gamut of policies accessible to counties. Next, I want to highlight 6 counties in New Mexico that have taken a really interesting approach to sharing their bottom-up perspective and building on that scaffolding of policies to different levels. So these New Mexico counties created a resolution. All of them created it separately, but they relied on similar language, so they were very coordinated in this. And the resolution highlights the importance of connectivity to their constituents, shares their interest in it, and it urges federal action, both at congressional levels and at federal agency levels. So this just does a really good job of demonstrating that bottom-up support, showing that counties are interested in this, and providing a little bit of perspective and nuance to the federal agencies that they may not be otherwise able to access. And it's a fairly simple approach. It's only a couple pages. Took them one meeting probably to hammer out, and pretty easy and different approach to sharing that perspective with other agencies. So to wrap this up, I really do just want to reemphasize how much county and local governments can do. They have the direct authority to regulate transportation and land use, and they have the ability to share this bottom-up grassroots perspective with agencies above them that can offer a lot of perspective and nuance that might otherwise be hard to gain. Counties have a spectrum of tools at their kind of beck and call, from the pretty basic resolution kind of approaches to pretty intensive detailed land use plans with the standing up of a dedicated funding source. And everything along that spectrum creates value when it comes to conserving connectivity. So that's my little bit of the presentation today. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle, and she's going to discuss in a little bit more detail some of what Colorado has going on and bring a great perspective from a practitioner of these policies. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Travis. Let me get this kicked off. Can you all see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, great. Let me ask, if I pull up a Word document with my notes, do you see that or just the presentation? Because I can't see the presentation, so.
You just see the presentation.
Okay, great. And then just let me know, make sure I'm advancing my slides appropriately. So I just wanted to start, I'm really excited to be part of this panel and discussion. I think it's great. It seems like all the states are starting to coalesce around working with counties and the power that counties have. Today, I am going to be focusing more at a higher level on our state policies, but Colorado, we are moving into these discussions with our local governments on what types of policies and plans and what kind of language they can have that supports connectivity. So more to come there. Let's see. I don't know why I can't see my slide. There it goes. Did it advance? And is it in?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just now,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, and it's in the PowerPoint view, correct, for you guys?
No,
Mary Jo?
I think you do need to click PowerPoint view.
Yeah, there we go. Now we're set. Sorry about
There.
that, everyone. Okay, now we're ready. So just to start, so I'm going to cover a wide range of kind of state policies and plans that we've developed here in Colorado dating back to 2017. And most of these are going to focus around wildlife vehicle collisions and reductions of wildlife vehicle collisions, but also will include some more general connectivity discussion. In 2017, with the completion of Colorado State Highway 9 crossing project, there was a lot of excitement in Colorado about wildlife and transportation projects, not to mention around the West. And also, I think we hosted our first Wildlife and Transportation Summit in 2017, which followed Wyoming's. We were very energized by attending Wyoming's Wildlife and Transportation Summit. So we hosted our first summit, and it was co-hosted by the Colorado Department of Transportation, or CDOT, by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or CPW, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And through that 2017 summit, there were several goals and actions that came out of the summit. Some of those were the creation of the Colorado Wildlife Transportation Alliance, which I'll go into more detail. And this group has really supported our advancements in connectivity around the roadway. There was also a lot of actions that came out of the summit to establish stronger partnerships and outreach strategies, which the Alliance also supports. There was also obviously a need for data sharing between CDOT and CPW, which we have developed an internal roadkill app that now our staff are collecting roadkill data and sharing that with CDOT. So we've bolstered CDOT's carcass data collection. Also an action to develop a consistent form of funding, which led to the formation of the Safe Passage Fund, which I'll talk about. And then we also identified many key issues and obstacles to implementing wildlife transportation projects around the state. So those are kind of the high level actions that came out of the summit. Also, we held our second Wildlife and Transportation Summit in 2023. And this summit really fits nicely with what we're talking about here today, because it really attracted a lot of county and local government and planners. We even had county commissioners. A lot of folks in Colorado really want to see wildlife crossing projects in their area. And what this led to was this discussion, what we're having today, about how can these local governments support connectivity beyond the roadway, right? We maybe can't build wildlife crossing projects everywhere in the state. And where we do build them, we want to make sure that we have strong connectivity. So what can be happening at the local level to support these actions? And a lot of those conversations came out of our 2023 summit. So as I mentioned, the Wildlife Transportation Alliance kind of was born out of the 2017 summit. And the Alliance also grew out of a need for increased awareness for wildlife crossing structures to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, increasing pressure on habitat connectivity due to increasing impacts from transportation, population growth, and visitation. Also, the need for statewide coordination between CDOT, CPW, and our partners. And it's a partnership between CDOT and CPW, federal, tribal, academic, private biologists, nonprofit NGOs, and engineers. It has a mission to provide safe passage for people and wildlife in Colorado, and a vision to build collaborative efforts to improve human safety while fully integrating wildlife movements into Colorado transportation systems. The Alliance consists of an oversight team, which includes one member from CDOT and CPW's leadership teams. It also has a diverse co-chair group, which kind of lead the day-to-day operations of the Alliance. We have a steering committee to funnel information down into the agencies. And then we also have a general membership. The Alliance is focused on developing criteria to rank projects and select priority projects to recommend to CDOT for funding support, One of the primary strengths of the Alliance has been increased and frequent communication between CDOT and CPW staff at all levels within the agency. And some of this is also, some of this increased communication actually led from the executive order, which was completed in 2019. So from the energy that we had in Colorado from the summit, the success of our crossing structures, and then the creation of the Alliance, and also from the federal Secretarial Order 3362, Governor Polis in 2019 signed the executive order conserving Colorado's big game winter range and migration corridors. And this had 4 primary objectives. The executive order requested or directed CPW to compile a status report for a big game species. It asked DNR to identify policy, regulatory, and legislative opportunities focused around big game seasonal habitats and migration corridors. It requested or directed CPW to incorporate the importance of migration corridors into public outreach and education. And it also directed CDOT to enable the reduction of wildlife, or to increase wildlife passage and reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, and to incorporate the consideration of big game migration into all levels of their planning effort. The executive order also led to the revision of CDOT and CPW's MOU. And the MOU highlighted the missions of the 2 agencies and stated that for economic, social, cultural, and recreational benefit of Colorado citizens and visitors, that CPW and CDOT should collaborate for the common purposes of maintaining and improving Colorado's transportation system, while also protecting and managing Colorado's fish and wildlife resources and their associated habitats. The MOU identified 6 primary areas of focus. One was the implementation of the executive order. The second was increasing and improving wildlife vehicle collision reporting, increasing data access and sharing among CDOT and CPW, also increasing our communication and coordination, and that included any public and media press releases. We now do joint press releases and media collaborations when we have new projects, or we release our annual fall wear for when animals start to move down and cross highways more. So we're doing those in collaboration now. And then also the MOU supported increased training and cross training between CDOT and CPW staff. I'm not going to focus on all 6 of the sections within the executive order, but I did want to highlight the implementation of the implementation section for the executive order. This included 3 main bullet points. The MOU again reinforces that cooperation to determine possible mitigation areas for wildlife vehicle collisions, and also incorporating those into all phases of transportation planning. To identify priority areas of implementation for big game crossings using the best available science. And also it directed CDOT and CPW to continue the support of the Colorado Wildlife and Transportation Alliance. The Transportation Alliance is co-funded by CDOT and CPW. And the Alliance consists of a team of consultants that kind of help move the Alliance and our efforts forward. Without the support of the consulting team, that help us with the day-to-day activities. They help us with generating any sort of public outreach materials. Without that continued support, we wouldn't be where we are in Colorado today. And so the MOU just continues to, or directs us to continue to support the Alliance. As I mentioned, the executive order also requested that CPW create a status report. This was completed in 2020. It kind of focuses on big game population status at the time, also identifies some data gap and research needs. And then the opportunity report, which was completed by DNR, has a goal has a goal to identify, evaluate, and recommend priorities for regulatory policy, legislative approaches to ensure the health of Colorado's big game herds. And this report offers almost 50 recommendations within 7 categories, which are focused on habitat, land use and development, recreation, transportation infrastructure, energy development, conservation on private lands, and research needs and data gaps. So the next piece of the puzzle that fell into place was following the alliance, the development of the alliance, actions outlined in the executive order, was the passage of the 2022 Colorado Safe Crossing for Wildlife and Motorists Act. The passage, the Safe Passage Act had strong bipartisan support, and it created the Wildlife Safe Passage Fund. And in 2022, the fund received an initial $5 million. And then in 2023, it received an additional $500,000. Those funds were allocated and priorities were selected through the Alliance, CDOT, and CPW, and those funds have already all been allocated out at this point. The projects that the money can be spent on from the Safe Passage Fund are to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions while promoting connectivity. And they can include everything from feasibility studies for projects, planning, design, construction, maintenance, and monitoring studies. So the funds can be used for much more than just construction. And we try to make sure that we disperse the funds throughout these different categories. The funds can also be used for land protection associated with any of these projects. And before the funds are administered from CDOT, CDOT is required to have consultation with CPW and the Alliance to review these projects. So here is a map of our state wildlife and transportation prioritization study results. This was completed in 2 phases. The West Slope portion was created or finalized in 2019, and the eastern half of the state study was completed in 2022. And so from these 2 studies, we now have a statewide prioritization for our transportation projects. The red areas are the top 10%, and within just the top 5%, so a portion of this, there's over 400 miles of roadway in the top 5%. Also, the report that was completed for the top 5% also outlined mitigation recommendations for projects within those areas. And this map is what we use when we're trying to identify priorities for funding in Colorado. We can go outside some of these priority areas, but we do try to use this to guide our selection process. This map is showing the prioritization study with our existing wildlife crossing structures. And on this map, there's probably close to 64 blue stars here that represent those structures. And it's important to mention that CDOT has been constructing crossing projects dating back to the 1960s and 70s into current time. Some of the older projects maybe aren't as effective or maybe not a complete system like what we've been building in the last 10 or 15 years, but they still are, they still do pass wildlife. And so we include all those structures kind of in our totals. And then this map, I've overlaid our wildlife, our elk migration corridors and our mule deer migration corridor layers. So this layer is available publicly. It's our CPW species activity maps. And CPW has been mapping migration corridors and other seasonal habitats since the 1980s with our staff. And over the years, as we get more data, either VHF collars or now GPS collars, and we're doing Brownie and Bridge modeling, and we're looking at concentrated areas where we have movement and corridors, we're using that data in collaboration with expert opinion. So a lot of this data is based on Brownie and Bridge concentrated areas. Colorado just has really wide swaths of migration corridors. They're not linear corridors. And then here I've just highlighted some of the areas where Colorado will be working on future transportation projects in the future. Oh, sorry, I already said that, but in the future. There's several areas around the state that we've identified for funding needs. And before I finish, I'd like to mention a couple things. First, Colorado is working on a statewide habitat conservation and connectivity plan. This plan was identified as a need in both the CPW status report and the DNR policy and opportunities report. This plan will provide comprehensive, coordinated, and strategic approach to large-scale habitat management and protection to benefit many internal CPW programs and help communicate CPW's priority areas to conservation partners. We're still in the process of selecting the priority areas, but in early 2025, once we have those areas selected, we'll be working with internal staff and our partners to develop projects within these priority areas. I also wanted to mention that Colorado is working with Pew and Center for Large Landscapes to do a similar policy report that Wyoming has produced. It'll be more detailed at the local level and at the county level. And that policy report will be out in early May 2025, and it'll build on what Wyoming has already completed. And then I wanted to plug the International Conference for Ecology and Transportation. This will be held in May 2025 in Denver, Colorado, and I believe registration is currently open. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you to Temple and Travis and Michelle for these wonderful presentations. It's really exciting to see how migration policy is becoming a priority in so many places around the country, and some of the innovative approaches being used. It's also clear that a lot of opportunity remains to continue to support animal movement and build policies and programs in other parts of the country, and even strengthen them in places where they already exist. Really appreciate all the time and effort that went into creating this report, and the time that you spent in preparing these presentations. At this time, I'd like to ask, and I think they've already done it, which is wonderful, all of our panelists to turn on their cameras. I'd even invite Drew to turn on his camera if he's able, since he was one of the authors of the report and might be able to contribute to some of the dialogue here. With the 10 minutes or so that we have left, I want to open it up to questions. And I know that we have a few questions that have been posted in the Q&A of the webinar. So perhaps we'll start right there for the panelists, and I'll help tee this up. And so the first question is, in any or many of these examples, what type of funding investment does the Department of Transportation and Fish and Game primarily, but perhaps also counties, NGOs, and sporting groups, governor's budget, what do they contribute to these efforts and projects?
I can take a first stab at that at the kind of county level, David. So in Teton County, Wyoming, I mentioned that they set up a special use excise tax or special project excise tax to pay for connectivity there. Summit County created that coalition to bring nonprofit and federal dollars to the table. Counties are able generally to access some degree of state and or federal funding. I'm going to share a few resources in the chat of some other research that's been done by ARC and Econ Northwest and the Pew Research Center on some other interesting and kind of innovative approaches to funding connectivity policies. But there's a variety of funding sources out there, especially with all these federal dollars. And in Wyoming, there's some great examples of NGOs bringing a lot of money to the table and fundraising and pairing that with Department of Transportation and Game and Fish dollars to get connectivity and overpass projects done.
I can add some specifics in Colorado. too, I mean, I'll use the example of the State Highway 9 project. Most of our projects do have other local funding support, counties, tribes, NGOs, but for State Highway 9, that one, the mitigation portion was probably around 15 million, and we received close to 4 million from a private person. The local county, which is 14,000 people, so it's a pretty small county for Colorado, that county gave $3 million. Other counties nearby, adjacent to the county where the project was built, gave hundreds, maybe 100, anywhere from tens to $100,000. And then there was private donations that probably were around 100,000 that were just through a nonprofit that went out and asked for donations. And so, and the DOT a lot of times is getting federal funds to help support. And then Parks and Wildlife, honestly, we've been kind of on the lower end. We don't have dedicated funds. And so a lot of times what we're doing is in-kind matching, or if there's a need for a conservation easement nearby, we'll purchase land, or even fee title. We'll go out and purchase the land to help support the project in that way.
Thank you. I'll go on to the next question, which I believe is for you, Michelle, and
Yeah.
whether the Colorado Safe Passage Bill will be renewed.
Yeah, so the fund exists right now in perpetuity, but the money going into the fund is not consistent. And so the fund is there to receive monies, which is great because it sets up a base. Currently, there are different entities working to try to establish a more consistent funding pool into that fund. So right now there is not an annual allocation. It's just going to be kind of as funds are available and made available through the legislation that'll be added. But the good thing is to have the fund there to receive the money when it is available.
Thank you.
The second one the next one too might be on the unexpected obstacles. I think some of the obstacles, when we're prioritizing projects, like some obstacles may be, what is the land protection surrounding a crossing project? We try not to build and spend millions of dollars on a crossing project that maybe has private land on both sides that does not have any land protection, or any sort of county regulations that could protect land development into the future. And so some obstacles are making sure that we have lands protected. And then we're also trying to look at connectivity, not just at the interface of the opening of the structure, but beyond. So, it's great if they can get to the structure, but if they can only move a short distance and then they hit more obstacles of development. La Plata County in Colorado has an MOU with CDOT and CPW, and they're limiting density of housing development or any development near a crossing structure to low and moderate. So I think looking at what counties can do to help secure connectivity would be some of the obstacles that we face. In addition to funding, obviously, that's an obvious one. Yeah.
Continuing on the theme maybe of talking about some of the obstacles, I think the next question talks about maybe some of the, I'll open this up for everybody, for some of the more political obstacles or local obstacles to some of this work. There's a question about appreciating the conversation on county level opportunities for connectivity, but noting that many rural communities are resistant to land use plan updates that would restrict private property rights. And so asking, could you talk more about the best practices for building support despite this obstacle? And has the New Mexico resolution been effective at breaking through this barrier?
I might jump in there, and then would be curious if Travis wants to jump in, but I think that the reality is that zoning is probably the largest tool and most impactful tool that counties have at their have the authority over However, that's a 4-letter word in many counties in the West and probably across the country. And so many counties are hesitant to rely on zoning because of exactly this political dynamic that Josh raises. I think my perspective is just looking at the spectrum of opportunities that are there, and if it's politically unfeasible, then it doesn't make sense to keep pushing that direction. But looking at how there could be opportunities for, say, transportation projects that maybe have much less of a political flashpoint that's out there. And so thinking about the other authorities and opportunities that are there. I don't think that New Mexico resolutions were effective at breaking through this particular challenge that Josh mentions in, say, Park County, Wyoming. But it has been effective of sort of indicating the support for projects like some of these transportation projects that Michelle has highlighted from Colorado, and really looking for some of that collaboration across state and federal agencies. So I think, again, there's looking at the full spectrum of opportunities that are out there for counties is probably the right way to approach this, instead of just thinking about zoning as the only opportunity that's there.
Yeah, Drew, that's great. That's exactly right. And I think there are a variety of options out there. And I think what New Mexico did that was kind of unique is because they shared that perspective at a federal level, they might have access to increased federal incentives to incentivize action rather than regulate action through zoning. Another good one that we reviewed in the report is Spokane County in Washington. And what they've done is they've created an incentive program through property tax relief and density transfers, which is kind of a unique approach. And they've incentivized more of that connectivity conservation at a county level there.
I'd like to also, maybe I can try to drop a chat or drop something in there. Colorado has many regional partnerships, and they're focused on recreation. They're done at county or adjacent. Now they're being done like in multi-county groups. Those groups, I mean, Wyoming, hopefully you don't end up where we are with the number of people and recreators, but you might. And so those are locally driven groups that the counties are involved in, and they're looking at recreation, but they're doing connectivity mapping, and they're talking about how, connectivity on a much larger scale. And so I would say, Mary Jo dropped that link in the chat. Look at those partnerships. I think that's a great way to kind of break some of those barriers down.
I'm going to ask one, I know we're approaching time, but I want to ask one last question as moderator prerogative here. And I'm curious to the authors that in your research, did you find that there were any mechanisms or purposeful efforts for states or counties or local governments to be sharing some of these policies or best practices on connectivity with each other, with other states, other municipalities, counties across the country? I'm just curious if something like that exists, if you came across that in your research.
I can take a crack at that one. I think the answer is no. I mean, a lot of the policies have requirements to do annual reports. Some of, the example that Michelle shared is, I think, a great example from Colorado. But yeah, and I think that this is happening organically. These agencies get together at different conferences during the year. And so I think it's happening at that level, but I didn't see it in any policies that's specifically requiring it. And so that was really something we hope to fill with this report, is to kind of do some of that sharing. And Michelle, excited to hear about the project that you're working on to kind of continue to expand this work, because I think it's really valuable to see what other people are experimenting with and trying in different parts of the country, and to think about if it may help overcome obstacles that folks are dealing with in their home state or in their home county.
And this is probably another good opportunity to shamelessly plug ICOET for Michelle, because that's another great opportunity to share and learn about other things going on.
Yeah, I only said it because I hope this becomes a springboard to that bigger conversation of, this report really aggregated a lot of information from around the country. I think it's incredibly helpful, and I think it shows that there might be opportunities for, or maybe even needs for continuing to share information and find places to create a clearinghouse for this type of information. And so
And David,
I
I
think
mean,
that report tease
sorry,
that.
I was just gonna,
Yeah.
I was just gonna add, at our 2023 summit, those folks there requested information from the Alliance on connectivity. They wanted plans and policy examples. So the counties and municipalities are actually looking for it. And so I think it's great that we're in this space because they're asking for it. So the door's kind of being opened for us to step in and provide it. And I think this is a great, like, kind of initiative to get that going, because I think the opportunities there, especially in places in Colorado, as we start to see shrinkage to like connectivity and all the impacts, and we have to do something. So
Wonderful. Well, I know we're at time. I want to say thank you again to all of our panelists, to the University of Wyoming's Ruckelshaus Institute, and partners for pulling this together, to the Hewlett Foundation again for their support to help make this happen, and to everybody that joined and spent the time with us today listening to this. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join. The recording will be made available for those that weren't available to attend, or those that did attend that want some of the information from it. And again, a quick reminder before we sign off that the report is available in the chat, along with some other resources that were talked about during the webinar today. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.